This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 98 of A Geek Leader podcast. And today on the show, we've got Sergey Razin. He is the CTO of Swampfox. He's also a faculty member at the University of South Carolina, and where he teaches about artificial intelligence. And he's also a serial entrepreneur. He's been involved in companies that have been acquired, gone through acquisition, and has a lot of good information about that. He talks about on the podcast about what it was like to kind of go through something like that. He also talks about some of the things that leaders need to know about when it comes to artificial intelligence, and some of the myths behind it, and some of the things that are ways that we can learn more about it as technical leaders. This has been a great episode. I really appreciate you guys listening, and I'm really thankful to Sergey for coming on the show. And we start off with Sergey talking a little bit about his journey through technology and how he got started and what he's doing today. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Sergey Razin.
Yeah, so as far as the path, I think it was pretty interesting. I mean, it's kind of started in sort of late 80s, just simply being interested in computers, I guess, right? And as a kid, I was basically, collecting parts, putting together computers, and with my friends, we did a small network to sort of play some video games over the COM cables and stuff like that, like Wolfenstein and all those games back then, right? And basically later on, I think maybe around 13, 14, where you start thinking about, when you get exposed more into the sort of math, more advanced math, at least in where I'm from Russia, it happens mandatory. It's not a sort of a selective thing where you like only honors get to see AB, ABC, calculus, and all that stuff. It's something that starts from 6th grade, I guess, right? So that's where I kind of realized, like, well, there is interesting that in life you always have to make choices, right? But how do you make a right choice, right? And in terms of being able to make a right choice, can you actually quantify that choice in any way? And possibly predict. And that's where basically I got interested in math and statistics. So now it's combining statistics and math with sort of computers. That's where, this whole premise of, statistical analysis, data analysis, and effectively gets us into this hot water of artificial intelligence came to me, right? So I went to undergrad at the University of South Carolina pretty early, started working in a tech company in Colombia, where we did some stuff with the telecommunications and dialogical boards and basically signal processing and things like that. And then I went back for my graduate school in Moscow, in Russia, where I'm from originally, and sort of where I defended my dissertation and kind of continued the path of sort of statistical data analysis and being interested in things like behavioral analytics and topological analysis of the data and things like that. So a reason why I kind of joined doctorate program was basically somewhat by an accident, because I was looking for sort of like, where would I apply my computer science, where I should go and work professionally, which is, I guess it's advantageous simply because you can make money, right? Or you would go and advance yourself academically, right? And it happened to be that in Moscow, one of the big security companies that's pretty well known, which is called Kaspersky, right? They basically ran a sort of a program joined with the university, with Bauman, Technical University in Moscow, which is pretty famous technical university. It's almost kind of MIT of Moscow, if you will, right? Or Russia. And they basically were kind of sponsored this track around AI, effectively, right, or statistical data analysis. That's how I got into that undergraduate or graduate program and stayed with it Later on, I worked as a research scientist for Kaspersky. We did a lot of interesting things around security and data analytics and looking for anomalies, applying different types of acoustical techniques and things like that. And later on, I basically joined the group of people that I'm actually back with today, who actually started Swampfox. Back then, they started a company called Kanita, which sort of kind of created what Siri, Cortana, and all those Google Assistant like, except I guess 18 years ago, right? And later on, I joined them when they got acquired by Avaya, and I was a speech engineer at Avaya, working on effectively connecting a contact center or IVR platforms. Back then, the voice response platform that you typically call in for customer service. Today, it's also being enhanced with chatbots and stuff. But ultimately, from traditional DTMF, where you press 1, 2, 3, you can actually speak to that sometimes in more statical way, or like operator or billing, or more open way, using natural language processing and natural language understanding. So that's kind of like, that's from Avaya. I went into a different space. We did a startup around behavioral analytics with a few colleagues, where I was a PI on some of NSF grants. And then later on, I joined company EMC, which is now Dell EMC, where I was focusing once again on mostly, application of data to the cloud and storage and networking and things like that. Originated the product called, now it's called Cloud IQ there. And this also was around sort of like data aggregation and things like that. That's where I became like a CTO of that product effectively. And later on, I joined a company called Sios, which is a Japanese-American company, which I, as a CTO, and there I created a product called Sios IQ effectively built a product, built a team, both technical and business, and basically we ran that for about 6 years. And now I'm at Swampfox, which is essentially a group of people that originally started Kanita, got acquired by Avaya, and who maintain this become the experts in intelligent customer experience and things like that. So,
when you went through that acquisition portion of your career, when you're going through that, what was that like? I mean, I've never gone through that type of, being acquired by a larger company. Was it stressful? Was it exciting? Was it a little bit of both?
Well, I mean, in my case, I joined that company actually at once acquisition already took place, right? So that's in this case that it wouldn't necessarily apply. I mean, I kind of can express the fact that I think from what I've seen, it was very positive kind of experience. There are certainly things get really different from a small startup that's definitely ran by a small group of people to be be part of the bigger organization, right? But that's a cultural change, process change, and everything changed around it. There's a lot of uncertainty and things like that. From my experience of just mergers and acquisitions at the EMC, I was involved in a few of those from a technical due diligence. But it's from the other side, I guess. It's. I can say basically that it is definitely a cultural change for sure.
What led you to? I know you talked about going down the academic route and getting your PhD, and then coming back and getting involved in entrepreneurship and development and working on products. And then you also teach at University of South Carolina. Some artificial intelligence. What led you to kind of hone in on that education as well? Because I do the same thing. I teach at Winthrop University in computer science, and it's one of those things that for me, it keeps me on top of things. It keeps me fresh. It's also a great way to get talent. If you're hiring, what are some of the reasons why you decided to go that route?
Well, I mean, I think so. One of the reasons why I guess I ended up in the program, in the PhD program, is because, like I said, it's just somewhat was accidental, and simply because the program was sponsored by the company that I thought has interesting use cases for data, right? And in general, I mean, as I got deeper into the sort of applied statistics, and in this case, applied in computer science, I kind of realized that that space have failed a few times prior, right? And mainly the reason for that failures were mainly two reasons, right? It was not a lack of algorithm or theoretical studies in this space. It's simply a lack of practical application, as well as the capacity of the resources, compute and storage resources, to be able to sort of process the data, as well as the availability of the data, right? And so those mainly two factors, the reason why AI was not successful before. And like looking at it from like like mid 90s or late 90s, I kind of realized like, well, it's inevitable that the technology, the compute will become cheaper and faster. It just was, even then it was kind of like 286, 386, 486 Pentium, and I mean advanced, right? And storage becomes cheaper, and it becomes commoditized, everything, right? And then, okay, so if that's going to become cheaper and faster, where we will get the data? And early on, you can see like emergence of Google and Facebook, and that's, I realized, okay, the data is going to be there. So basically, it's a perfect time to invest and prove that actually AI has great potentials, right? And will actually win potentially in the next 20 years or so, which is kind of taking us to today. Then basically, that's how I ended up in the program. And the reason why I didn't stay in the program is mainly because I realized that, well, the reason I joined is to prove that it works, not to prove that it theoretically works. So that's why I kind of like went into the development route, and basically started to actually develop products, right? And develop a practical application that actually would effectively help people or help products and stuff like that. And then basically after that, after I did a few of those, I also realized like, well, now I've learned quite a bit, and I've led teams, I've led companies, and I've like still leading a company. Now it's like now it's time to kind of like turn that around and maybe contribute to both to the community, to the students, and like you said, it's also a very effective way to do the recruiting as well. So
yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's so fascinating to see the things that are happening when it comes to AI and what that's going to mean for the future. Is that more like is it going to be more? I don't. You mentioned things are going to become cheaper. That's inevitable. That it's going to be more like artificial intelligence as a service, or is it going to be more embedded than that? And kind of in everything that we do, that it's not necessarily like yeah, because you have like software as a service that you can go get, or is it something that's going to be more embedded? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, the exciting part, I think, of where we started, even if it take it like 10 years ago or something like this, right? Effectively, there was no frameworks or even the resources available to make this. I mean, the compute was there, the cloud was emerging, the algorithms and such, you still had to develop yourself by hand, right? And to be able to productize that, I'm sorry, I have some, I think, background noise if you hear that. Somebody drilling, I guess, holes. Sorry. So basically, you had to still build all this stuff. You still have to incorporate, like you have to create your own neural networks, logistic regressions, or the random forests. All of that was sort of like still had to be built by yourself, right? Independent that the compute availability was kind of there through like virtualization and maybe like emergence of compute and things like that. Now if you check basically leap just 10 years into today, right, it's a drastic change to where, basically IT as it is being sort of absorbed and no longer a big bottleneck, right? Because that was one of the problems. Also, like once compute and storage got faster, IT could not keep up with us, right? And more availability of resources, like, to acquire any type of additional programs, we have to go through all kinds of like checks and balances and corporate, requirements of whether you can introduce this kind of like, framework or whatever, right? Cloud enabled a huge kind of leap in innovation to where basically now for you to experiment, you don't have to go to like your typical IT administrator. You just can simply swipe a card and get this thing rolling in the cloud. So I think, I'm just kind of like kind of jumping into the fact that sort of cloud enabled a lot of those capabilities to become available on demand, which is a huge, I think, from a research perspective, right? And now also there was a bunch of advances that were powered by different types of large companies like Google and Amazon and such to become sort of commoditize some of those frameworks, right? Whether it's a TensorFlow, whether there are others like Comprehend that Amazon has, So ultimately, all those services enable you to kind of like bring the compute, bring the frameworks. Now let's apply the data and truly make something interesting and innovative happen, right? Before we actually had to build all by hand, which actually takes some time. I mean, it's going to be like a year to a year and a half before you can reliably build something that will simply reliably run, right? Beyond the experiments, right?
You had to build the infrastructure around it and the framework that you're developing on. But now you seem like with the cloud solution and with like cloud AI products and things like that, you can just I don't want to say rent the framework and the services, but basically you have that already built for you, so you can get to market a lot faster. And
absolutely,
yeah. Do you think that's going to cause the competition in these type of products to explode, or do you think it's just going to be more of a balanced approach?
Well, I think it's good. I mean, I'm really fascinated, excited about what's going to happen next, right? Because again, this is the reason why I kind of invested into this space early on, like, effectively 20 years ago, because I believe that is going to happen as things get faster, more data become available, right? Now we got IT off our back, who basically traditionally was sort of like holding back in terms of like, requirements and things like that. Now cloud enables that innovation. Now it's just basically like, it's free for all. Let's make it happen, right? Let's see what we can extract from the data, what kind of business use cases we can, there is all kinds of explorational things happening, not in just the traditional business sense, right? Where people like, how can we ultimately sell more products to people, right? How can we market? How we can do this, right? But it's a lot of things happening in genetic space, right? In medical, healthcare. I mean, and if we can make it available on demand, if you bring data to it, then you can do a lot of exciting things. And I think competition will grow absolutely, which is awesome and exciting, and and things like that. Also, but there is also could be bottleneck now. The data may become a bottleneck.
So what kind of fears do you have with this growth? You mentioned genetics, and I'm sure you've heard of CRISPR and being able to genetically modify, our genes, before we're born, and you can pick what your baby looks like, or potentially we can get to that point. How do you think artificial intelligence will fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of, concerns. I mean, so while everything is enabled, there is all kinds of concerns around even aspects of the data. I mean, not even talking into basically genetically modifying the human or anything like that, but even on the basis of a data, right? Today, basically, data somewhat contained within certain entities like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, right? Frankly speaking, or maybe Twitter a little bit. But so there is definitely feels like while we do enable compute and frameworks, right, to run faster and bigger and better, right? There's the same time it's kind of what's happening. There's going to be manipulation of use cases. Will likely resonate or come from from those resources, like from those four companies, right, or so. Which is that's kind of worrisome, because ultimately AI cannot survive without data, and Certainly, in the times maybe 8 years ago, where venture capitalists and such were very sort of naive and looking at this stuff like, oh yeah, you have AI, you have ML, you have a great algorithm, let's invest, right? On the other hand, now everyone is educated that there's nothing is actually, no matter how great your algorithm is, in order to prove it works, you have to have data and lots of it, right? Well, and if you're going to come out with like, well, I actually trained it on the 6 months or the data. I was like, well, that's not enough. That means you don't have a good evidence that this thing actually works. It potentially tracks any type of seasonal or cyclical patterns and things like that. So now you're back to the fact that so who has the data likely win the competition, right? So, but this is where I think also an opportunity to sort of democratize some of this and potentially decentralize with the emergence of things like blockchain technologies and awareness, right? Because we hear a lot in the news, people talking about hacking of Facebook and stuff like that. The more people will become aware, the more people will say like, well, we may want to actually capitalize on our data, because today we're actually not able to. We just basically give it away for free, right? At the same time, once it's democratized, that enables the competition and allows others to use it, right? Not just Google and Facebook.
So how do you think that relates to privacy? Like, I know Facebook's kind of been in a lot of trouble lately because they're using our data without us understanding how it's being used sometimes, and people are getting upset about that. How do you feel about, people's data being, being used, and how that's going to affect?
Well, I think. Well, it's just. I guess it's kind of like. There is no binary answer to this, right?
Yeah.
Basically, I guess I don't feel good about it, and I guess I feel bad about it. But at the same time, feeling bad about it yourself is not good enough.
Right.
And we actually have done some. People have to feel bad about it and be aware, and that's where basically the awareness and education has to come from. And there are certain organizations already talking about things like even security of your data, or mainly security of your kids on the internet, right? That's ultimately also comes to the data and what they share, what they talk about, right? So also, on the news, they talk about all the privacy violations that take place, right? And such. And we recently have released a survey where also gave us an idea that basically people are in fact aware that they have valuable information. The only problem that they don't know what to do about it. Right? Because the artifact of them giving away information, in return they get some services like communication or search and such, which they wouldn't get otherwise, right? I mean, if somebody would say like, well, John, you're going to keep all your data, but now you're going to have to pay for email and communication, Facebook and all that stuff, right? Well, that just simply in this kind of already space that we are in, or time we're in, it's not going to work. So something has to change to where even the business model of how it delivers still enables people to use services while not necessarily exposing their data or even the identity for that matter.
Yeah. I think the identity part is probably one of the keys, because you can use the data if you anonymize it correctly. Although, I guess you can always reverse engineer that at some point, possibly in the future, to get that back. I do agree that we do give our data in exchange for a service that we see it as free, but the price is our data, right? And what are your thoughts on some of the I don't know. I've been trying to catch up on AI because I've been out of the game for a little bit, and I saw this website, thispersondoesnotexist.com. Have you heard about that? Where it just generates a random picture of a person that apparently doesn't exist, but it looks like they do exist. It's really kind of creepy. But could you, and they obviously had a bunch of data images or something to build upon in order to create that. Where did those come from? You think that came from like Creative Commons licenses or something like that? And what do you think the impacts or potential negative consequences of a site like that, where you can just generate a person that I guess I could, theoretically generate this person and use it as a profile, create a fake account on Twitter and go,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Well, I mean, this is not. I mean, there's the pictures, right? I mean, you see, obviously, things like, even the sort of traditional text to speech, which was sounding really more like a robot, becoming more like sound like a human, right? So it's not just like basically. And there was recently, I think, the generation of like a non-gender voice where you can't really figure out whether it's a male or a female voice, right? So there's all kinds of interesting things that are happening, but ultimately it comes down to some potentially very scary things, like you just mentioned, especially in the space of security, right? Where sort of like there could be bad actors, right? And things like that. Which will impact in terms of like both that they can be basically sound like a human and potentially reproduce sort of you as a human in both in voice and the way that you communicate and the way you look, and or even create something that's completely like doesn't even exist, right? And so I think it's all valid concerns. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just it's really fascinating because there's a lot of fear that comes with AI, but there's also a lot of benefits, a lot of positives that are out there. And one of the things that I think your company is doing is using kind of the idea of improving customer experience and customer interactions with IVRs and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how what the future of that industry is like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting where right now it's with intelligence that produced by machine learning and statistical data analysis. And in fact, I mean, I'm not even sure if these days, I mean, AI to me is not really more like artificial, it's more like augmented, right? But basically, I think we're not at the point where we can sort of produce something as like as a personal assistant in a movie like Her, right? Where basically it's completely self-aware and is basically, has all those kind of human behaviors factors built into it. However, we very well can be optimizing our operations or whatever we do, and ultimately augment some of the stuff that we routinely do as humans, which makes us potentially not a human, right? Some of the things that we do is just basically unhuman-like, right? But we're forced to do it because that's what we're used to, right? But if it's actually optimized and potentially may impact some of the jobs, but at the same time, some of those jobs are kind of like, somebody is basically looking through millions of records. I mean, just in this kind of odd example, right? Somebody looking through millions of records to look for a word, team or something, or a ball, right? It's probably somebody would pay for this, but at the same time, is that the job you want to have? Well, maybe not. I mean, there's a way to automate that, right? But in terms of the customer experience, I think that industry also taking a big leap in the fact with being powered by natural language understanding type of platform, whether it's a dialogue flow, whether it's like a Lex and Alexa and such, right? To where basically you can enable not only predefined set of phrases to communicate to the IVR systems, right? You can also now actually finally listen to what people are truly talking to your brand about, right? So, and that can be would open opportunities not only to potentially automate some of those stuff, which call like a kind of self-service, right? Or even understand some of the business opportunities that your company is not capitalizing on. Like, for example, the IVRs is basically a robot, right? The only purpose that IVR even exists, right, is to basically automate what humans, the very expensive human agents do, right? So, instead of you talking to a human, right, you can basically talk to an IVR system that will accomplish the task potentially faster and cheaper, right? So IVR is a robot. Now, basically, if it's only driven by a statically defined set of parameters, like press 1, 2, and 3, well, this is the only thing you can do. But what else people would like to do, right? And that's where basically sort of how may I help you kind of menus start coming up, where basically it tries to derive the intent from your natural language, right? And you may say something about like, well, I would like to understand, I would like to buy a watch, right? Well, maybe and if you discover that there is thousands of people ask to buy a watch from your company, which today obviously a company that maybe sells watches, but that if you automate just that alone, that operation alone, it will actually optimize your call center operation, customer service, right, and save you money. Then it's probably worth investing, right? And the same thing, like, you might be a company that does sell sandwiches, but everybody, basically, you'll discover through natural language that everybody calling about pizza, right? Well, and you basically analyze the text and discover that 20% of the calls out of 100 ask for pizza. Well, maybe you should just start offering pizza because it will grow your business, right? So this is basically, those are opportunity for business growth, right? But in addition to that, which is, I think, very important, is similar to what sales objectives were before, which still exists. Like, how do you sell someone something before they even want that, right? Which is kind of like, I guess, was today poorly done by like Facebook and such, because it's very, sort of post you buying the shoes, they offer you shoes, right? It's not really helpful, right? But in similar case, like, could you basically sense the trouble, right, and contact the customer before to improve your brand, right? So effectively, like, if I had a delay on a flight, right, contact me and say like, hey, we know that there is a delay on your flight. Instead of me calling and standing there on hold, you can just text me and say like, we are aware that there is a delay on your flight. By the way, here is the coupon for a next available across the street in Chicago bakery, where we know you like to get a bagel because you like bagels in the morning, right? Or, for example, if you landed late or maybe had bad customer experience in the hotel, we will offer you a free lunch or dinner, right? Or when your cable box disconnected because of the outage, well, why don't you just text me and say like, hey, we got it. We know that you're disconnected. We're working on it, right? That's basically not increases just the brand in terms of like customer experience and the feeling of a customer about the brand, right, about the company, but also offloads a lot of resources, right, if you think about it. Because every time when I call you, there is some kind of compute and technology that gets involved that get occupied, right? Well, if you didn't have to call me, that doesn't have to happen. If you don't have to call and even speak to someone, I just saved thousands, potentially with the quantity of potential like outages that may be happening. It could be millions of dollars just for me to simply contact you and tell you like, yes, there is an outage. 300 people are impacted. We're working on it. Here is the location of where the transformer blew up, and here is the picture of the crew working, right? So everything. I don't have to call anybody and things like that, right? And so this is where I think the big transformation of the contact center and customer experience going they're enabled by AI. And of course, chatbots are part of that, right?
No, I think those are some brilliant ways that we see that machine learning and artificial intelligence can really help us out in the long and well, short term and long term, just making life easier and better for all those around us. Not only just the company being more efficient and saving resources, but also the customer, which I think is the point.
Right. Yep.
So when it comes to moving in these new frontiers, if you will, of machine learning and artificial intelligence, what are some of the things that you think tech leaders out there that haven't really worked a whole lot in artificial intelligence? Maybe I came up as just a web developer and I've done .NET, Java, PHP, whatever, and now I'm managing and leading a team, and I've never really dabbled or learned much in artificial intelligence. What do you think I should know or learn about artificial intelligence and machine learning to be a better leader?
Well, I think so. I had a lot of conversations, especially as a CTO. You get to not only like sort of create products or architect them, you actually get to sell the products and talk to the customers and understand what they know, what they don't, and what they should know, and I wish they did know, right? And things like that. So I think, one thing I think is very important, just from a very high level, is to understand that we're kind of beyond the hype of machine learning and AI being productive. it is already working, right? It works everywhere, and it works in many businesses. And maybe it's I don't know, and it probably if you're thinking about your business, most likely your competition already employs it in some way, right? So I mean, it's so basically sort of not being educated or not to be aware or not or ignore it for some reason, because we all have a lot of things to do, right? But if you're a leader in your company, you should be aware and understand that first of all, this thing is real and is definitely coming in all kinds of forms and form factors and and things like that, right? Businesses and use cases. And as far as the next step would be to figure out whether it's applicable to your business. And I think, I mean, most likely yes, right? I don't see any. I mean, you just throw it anywhere, right? I mean, even if you like emptying the trash cans, right? There is some data there, right? It's like for the frequency of the emptying the trash cans, how big trash cans are occurring, what are they populated with, how can we optimize the operation? It ultimately comes down to it's all about optimizing optimizing your business, whether it's selling more, packing more or less, right? Predicting different types of patterns, be more effective, stacking of the shelves or whatever it might be, right? Now, if you're in the point where like, yeah, I got it, it's important for my business, I see the use cases. The next thing is basically, well, how do you do it, right? Yeah, and this is where basically I would recommend. Depending on how a low level in your position you will be able to get, like if you're like CEO, you probably don't need to go into Coursera and such, and maybe even take the AI courses. However, it wouldn't hurt, right? But it is definitely educating yourself in what are the techniques and technologies is out there, and maybe even specific to your industry through going to different types of even conferences, right? If you're just talking about, if you're like executive level, right, to understand what's happening, right? There's many data and machine learning conferences that are specific to healthcare space and IT space and digital, sales and marketing space, right? That will enable you to sort of at least get a kind of a brush stroke of how is it applied today and where it's all going, right? And you can go in deeper level and educate yourself and take a few courses from online resources like Coursera and such, right? And finally, also, like once you get to the point where like, okay, now I want to do something, one thing I would say that depending on what you're building, of course, but I would say that you need to have a good expert in your team that understand and have experience in building that. Because I've seen many times where basically a company that has perhaps engineers, right? Engineers are by nature will do anything, right? And they like to build stuff, which is very exciting, right? But one of the failures that I see is the fact that not having a proper leadership that understands that space, both maybe the vertical that you're in and how that vertical applies to the data and technology, that's where the failures happen. And I've seen them in many, many companies where basically the key is to have a right leader that basically can help you to implement that. Because in most cases, it's being thrown against the wall, basically, and say, okay, guys, we need to build this thing. And of course, the engineers build that, but they don't have any experience and understanding of all the consequences of what and where do you even start with the data, right? Because I guess while the frameworks and such, a bunch of them are available out there. That's actually more like a bad thing, because engineers will just take the data, shower it into some algorithm, get the result, and says, "Here, we got it," right? But there is no clear understanding what did you get, whether it's a predictive of indicative of anything that's in your data, right? And that's why the person who has a great understanding of the data, of the statistical kind of like techniques, and sort of educated in the art of machine learning or statistics is critical to be able to deliver that.
Now, I've heard several people talk about one of the downfalls or negatives that some of those AI services have out there is they can't really determine, or it's difficult to determine how came up with the information. So like you throw a bunch of data at it and it gives you a result, but it's like a kid doing math problems, and they didn't show their work. So how did they get that number? Have you seen that as one of the downfalls, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I can comment both on the people. It depends who you're talking to, right? Because basically, if you're talking to, again, the people who have never built, or mainly basically say, okay, I'm a coder, I can code anything, right? Just give me the data and I'll throw it and I'll get something, right? So yes, of course, you just basically gotta get the result, and here is the result. But how, let's say, neural network, how does this, 3-layer neural network with certain hyperparameters came up with it? I don't even know how I said those hyperparameters, but some like this number 56 came out, right? And it seems reasonable because I think it matches something that's basically that I would expect somewhere there, right? So I think not being educated in this space could result in this type of things. Like, I don't know, it just came up with something and here is the result, right? That's why you have to have, again, going back to the proper leadership, but also the process, right? Because technically, if AI is not a magic box, right? And by throwing data at it and getting some results, it will produce something. But it's all about pattern recognition for the most part, right? If you think about it simplistically, right? And if you can't, as a human, see the pattern, any of those frameworks won't find it. They will find something, but whether it's meaningful, it's not actually. It's not it's not guaranteed, right? So you have to define a process in which basically before you even start implementing something, you actually understand what's in your data. And it could take a few weeks or maybe up to a month to basically understand, like, first of all, well, do I have all the data? And and if you're looking at, like, I don't know, like, for example, can I predict how many people are, and I'm just kind of like taking out the wall, right? How many people are going through the store line or something like this, right? Well, I mean, just looking at purely at the rate, right, is not enough, right? That's a behavioral pattern and may result into all kinds of things happening. It could be a big sale happening, right? It could be resulting of some Twitter that's a company send. It could be a negative or a positive, right? It could be a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday type of seasonal situation. So you kind of have to incorporate all of that stuff in order to be able to figure out, so what is the pattern that I'm trying to derive? And it's going to be multidimensional. There's going to be a bunch of data features, right? So you can't simply say, like, okay, I'm just going to stick a rate of people coming through the door, and I'm going to come out what's going to happen on Wednesday. Well, no, it's not going to happen, right? So first you have to start with basically understanding of the patterns, building this AI process, which ultimately is going to look like a pipeline, and only then choosing a proper framework, proper algorithm that's actually corresponding to your data, and then you'll feel much better about what comes out at the end versus just basically, I have data, here is the engine, here is the result.
Yeah.
How did it come up with it? I have no idea. Because, and if you look inside, the machine learning is not that complicated. I mean, in terms of the even implementation of it, but it really comes down to recognition of the patterns, and that's a critical part of it. Because if you can't do it, if you don't see it, the AI is not the magic box. It's not going to come up with it, right, either. So it's going to create junk.
Yeah.
So junk in, junk out.
Okay. Well, I think that's really good, and I really appreciate everything that you've been telling us. How can people find out more about you and the things that you're doing?
Well, I mean, so I have a Twitter account, I have a LinkedIn account, and so maybe that's something that's worth posting.
Yeah, I can link those up in the show notes.
And if anybody has any questions, I can even share my email address with you and such. So I do a lot of sort of consulting for companies, both like in terms of the kind of a thought leadership and things like that, because it's not only enables Swampfox, but it's kind of enables the whole like, I guess, company, businesses, all kinds of businesses, to be able to actually educate it in this space, right? Which is right now, it's very hot, and I don't see it's going away anytime soon. But at the same time, it's getting very, very practical and achievable. And once you sort of like have a right kind of like structure in place, right, in your organization and the process and the right team, I think you can deliver it in a very well and take advantage of it. So.
Okay, well, I'll link that stuff up in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Sergey. And if so, please share it with a friend and check out the show notes at geekleader.com. Thanks so much.